We're uncovering solutions for the accounting talent gap. This is the IssuesWatch podcast. Hi, I'm Don Meyer, Chief Marketing Officer at the New Jersey Society of CPAs, and welcome to the IssuesWatch podcast. When it comes to the accounting profession's talent crisis or the current landscape of diversity, equity, and inclusion, it seems that everyone has an opinion. But what does empirical research tell us about how we should be looking at and addressing these two critical and connected issues? Here with me to discuss two research reports that highlight strategies and approaches to improve retention, reduce turnover, and foster a more inclusive and equitable accounting industry is Donny Shimamoto. Donny is the founder and managing director of Intraprise Techknowlogies, LLC, and founder and inspiration architect for the Center for Accounting Transformation. Welcome, Donny.
Thanks, Don. Good to be back again.
Yeah, all right. So let's start with the Center for Accounting Transformation's research report detailing the growing staffing crisis in the accounting profession. This is a topic we've covered on this podcast many times. So let's start with some of the highlights from the report.
What inspired the report was everyone was talking about this, but when we actually tried to look for data around it, we couldn't find data that actually quantified, whether this was actually occurring. And so I think as you guys pointed out before, the stat that really stood out was the 2/3 that said that burnout is a significant issue. And what we're really seeing from that stat, or with the additional data that we collected, was that everyone's still, feeling it. And we hear this staffing crisis that's occurring. So there's a lot that's going on.
So the stat, as you just said, the stat that stood out to me was that 2/3 of respondents reported burnout as a significant issue. So are unreasonable workloads the culprit?
We're seeing a mix of things in the responses. A lot of it really was tied back to those workloads. Unfortunately, we weren't able to dive too much deeper into that. We do have another research piece that we did that looked at workloads, and this is our research actually around advisory services. And it was what we were really looking at there was, is there a mix of compliance versus advisory, and are we seeing a difference in the workloads there? Generally across the board, we're seeing people report, there's basically a workload issue. But what was more troubling, I think, when we went into the data was really that people are feeling the impact. So, and I say it that way because part of what we see in accounting in general is that people are willing to work hard. So it wasn't just the fact that they're working hard. And in fact, there's also this tenor around, it's almost an acceptance that I'll work harder than per se the regular professional, especially during busy season. But it was for a sustained amount. So with the changes in regulation, the impact of tax code changes, right? All of these things that have been hitting us year after year after year, it's now hitting this point with remote work, with changes, because part of what we saw in the data was it's because we're seeing some turnover in our firms or in our departments.
So what are some strategies that firms and companies are employing to address these challenges? And you speak with a lot of people in the profession. So whether it came out of the report or things you've heard anecdotally, what are some strategies firms can use?
Well, and this is where I'm going to share what we saw more in the report, because this was the same thing, right? There's a lot of anecdotally, we're doing this, we're doing that. And what we wanted to do was the research to say, well, what is actually working? And so what a lot of people are doing, we see hiring your bachelor's people, right? All of your traditional recruiting. The things that stood out though, when we looked at that and said, well, what other things should people be doing? The use of an offshore talent. So whether it is an extension of your firm, whether you're working through an outsourcer, we've seen this huge influx of outsourcing companies come in. And so outsourcing was probably one of the biggest pieces. Even in our practice, what we're seeing is increased inquiries in how do I use outsourcers? How do I do it and maintain the security of things, right? Those are the questions that we're starting to get. And we've gotten more of that in the last 2 years than we have, the entire time I've been working in practice, which is over 20 years at this point. So really, it's this outsourcing is the big one. And there's a lot of things people don't realize is that there's a range of outsourcers, from those that just do recruiting to those that really are an extension of your firm or your finance department. So that was like the number one that we saw where there was kind of interest in it. The other things that everyone else is saying, because we also looked at things like, are you doing demand reduction? Are you actually culling clients? Like those all appear to actually be in use. So, you hear a lot of consultants say you should do it. Looks like firms are actually doing it. One of the other things that we saw that people really need to be doing more, though, is actually starting to more collaboration and use of specialists. So that's an interesting one, and that's part of this complexity, right? I mentioned the changes in the regulations and the taxes, and even it's coming down into the smaller businesses. So even a smaller firm or a smaller practice may actually need to understand some of these more complex matters. Well, how do you do that? It's actually by collaborating with others that have that expertise. So, I've been doing a lot more work recently with the CPA firm associations, and that's really where I'm seeing this activity of even large firms collaborating with each other to better serve a client.
Oh, wow, that's interesting. I hadn't heard that. We had been hearing more and more about large firms referring clients. Speaking to your culling of clients, they're culling clients by referring them to smaller firms, so mid-size or smaller firms who they have relationships with. So the client is still taken care of, but there's a recognition that the larger firm can't necessarily accommodate everybody because they just don't have the bandwidth for it.
Totally. And that's the thing I love about our profession, is the fact that in the end we still care about our clients. We used to actually also have this joke, like, take the clients you don't like that you're going to fire and send them to your nearest competitor so that they kind of take them down.
Right.
But really what we're really looking at, and you said it yourself, is we're seeing, even as firms merge up, because that's the thing that I worry too, is we see all these mergers and acquisitions occurring, smaller firms merging up, and then is the entire client base still being served by this larger firm that they're merging into, where there's a trickle down into the mid and even into the small firms as these clients start to filter.
Right. Yeah. And I had heard it described, the current environment, I heard described as kind of an hourglass shape. So the up top, there's a lot of large flourishing firms, and they're getting bigger because they're merging in with the mid-sized firms, but then that's sort of hollowing out the middle. And then you still have a pretty solid base at the bottom of smaller firms and sole practitioners, but those folks are getting older. So I think the concern is it's going to be very top heavy and then get kind of narrower and narrower as you go down.
Yeah, but the other thing to keep in mind and is that as firm merge up, there are those that don't want to be part of that big firm. They purposely went with a local firm or with a mid-sized firm. So the other thing that I'm seeing, this is still anecdotal, but I'm actually seeing and talking to some of these other businesses that are helping empower these ones that leave the big firms.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hearing a lot of them are seeing uptick in either like their membership or the staff that they're able to get, because there are people that say, hey, I purposely didn't want to be part of a big firm. I want to be part of a smaller firm.
Right, exactly. I think there's going to be a lot of opportunity in the next 5 years for millennials or even older Gen Zers who are entrepreneurial, who want to hang up their own shingle. I think there's going to be a huge opportunity to not only start a business, but grow a business fairly quickly, because, you have those baby boomers who are retiring. And they don't want to leave hundreds of clients hanging. So they'll be looking to either pass their company down to somebody else or perhaps sell it or something. So I think it's going to be a lot of opportunities for those who are interested in being their own boss.
Yeah, and I don't think it's in the next 5 years. I think it's already now. But
Okay.
we're already seeing that the number of firms that are starting up, like you said, hanging their own shingle out there. I see more activity than I have in, again, the entire time I've been in the profession.
Oh, wow, that's good to know. Okay. So let's transition to the second research report. That was titled "The DEI Journey of the Accounting Profession." It found connections between the staffing crisis and the profession's diversity challenges. So let's start with the report's key findings. What did you find in that research?
So probably our biggest one, not surprising, is that we still do have a problem. We went and we analyzed an 11-year period from I think it was 2011 coming out to 2022, which is we used the AICPA's trends report data, and we looked at what did the graduates look like in 2011 and what did the partners look like in 2022. So 11 years, some may argue that's not enough time to make it to partner. Small, mid-size, you're going to see, we should be seeing that change already occur in that period. So we kind of looked at that and we said, you know what, even though in 2011 already, we were seeing this change in diversity of candidates that are graduating in accounting, what we still haven't seen is that change at the partner level. Effectively, it was just over half, I believe, was still effectively white. And so when we looked at that, there was changes in the minority ethnics. We saw the Latino side take huge jumps in theirs. We saw some decrease in Black, and we saw some decrease in Black and increase in Asian. So we're seeing, some mixes there. The thing to remember on that, though, is that these are percentages. So, for example, even though we saw less Black partners, it doesn't mean that there's less partners by volume. It's less by percentage.
So in speaking about the research, you had said, quote, "The findings of this study underscore that DE&I is no longer a nice to have. It is a strategic imperative that impacts recruitment, retention, and overall performance in firms of all sizes. This report is both a call to action and a roadmap for the accounting profession to shift its focus to inclusion and belonging." And what I found interesting about that quote was it's something that our former CEO, Ralph Thomas, and our current CEO, AJ Johnson, say all the time is we tend to think of DEI in terms of either legislation or legal opinions or maybe societal issues. And really from an accounting perspective, as you would put, it's a strategic or a business imperative. So how do firms incorporate DE&I into their overall corporate strategy or culture and not as a separate initiative?
Well, and this is where, I know I actually just made the comparison of the graduates to the partners, and that really starts to come to the concept of equality. Are we actually looking for equal representation in the graduates and in the partners? And part of what we're seeing, and we have a whole working group that I work with to kind of analyze this stuff, is we need to stop this focus on equality or creating equal outcomes. Instead, what we really, and this is why the E in DEI is equity, what we need to do is ensure that there is equal opportunity, or that equity, that ability, right? The ability to have that opportunity. And so that's why it becomes a shifting into the culture. And I'm actually going to tie it back to the staffing research that we did. So in the staffing research that we did, we asked firms that were very successful or considered themselves highly successful in staffing, what were the things that stood out, that you really needed, that were key for you, both in the recruiting and in the retention areas. Great culture was cited as the reason. Now, when we take that and we turn that into the DEI setting, as we started to analyze and as I was talking to various firms about what they've been doing in response to like the great resignation, right, and all of this turnover that's occurred, what I actually found was that it wasn't this equality of representation that was creating the retention and the ability to recruit. What it really was this culture. in the report, we shared an example, for example, of a firm that was in Texas that was Jewish owned. The majority of the staff was Jewish, but not everyone was Jewish. And the interesting thing that they said, though, was that the firm was founded and lives Jewish values. So they don't require the staff to, of course, be religiously Jewish, but they ask them and they do talk about the values there. That was an interesting example of something that is, technically not diverse. You've got a majority of Jewish in there, so a concentration of a particular religion. And that firm has been thriving, growing organically. Another example that we share in the report is also one of a very right-wing firm. So this is a smaller firm. The firm owner, very conservative, very right-wing in views. The staff shares that views. Their clients tend to be those, because this firm owner is very open about their views on various issues. Their clients tend to go that way too. This firm is also successful. They are smaller. They have been going through some growth, but there's an alignment of values. There's a particular culture that they're upholding. I wouldn't say from just talking with them that people feel oppressed or anything, right? It's interesting to kind of see these examples of non-diversity still being successful, still serving clients, which is where we started a lot of this conversation, serving clients that need help, that want to be prosperous. So as we start to look at all of these things in DEI, this is why we're coming back and saying, what really is key is the culture. And we're not here to judge people on what's the right or wrong culture, but as long as people feel included in the firm and they're upholding the ethics and the standards of our profession, then this is an example of success.
And I guess also the values or the culture of a firm also has to reflect the clientele. And so naturally, a larger firm, especially one that's national, is going to naturally be more diverse or need to be more diverse because their clientele is going to be more diverse. And if a lot of new businesses and small businesses are owned and run by diverse ownership, they probably want to work with an accounting firm that looks like them. So I guess it depends on what your niche is and what your market is. But ultimately, staff want to work for a firm that is in line with their values and the culture that they believe in.
Right, which comes back to the strategy, right? So this is why if your strategy is, for example, to serve the Latino population, you are going to need Spanish speakers. You are going to need people that understand the nuances of Latino values and how that plays into whether they save or not, what they prioritize on spending, right? The need, and we see this in the Asian community as well, the need to take care of the elders, the lack of a college education and the lack of understanding perhaps of that value. So really starting to bring those elements together to serve and align what your firm is doing with the clients that you're serving and being able to speak almost literally in this sense, their language.
Perfect. Well, this was great insights, Donny. We really appreciate your time and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you. And if anyone wants to read the reports, we welcome them. It's the URL to download them is help.improvetheworld.net/issueswatch. So thanks again.
Thanks for listening and watching. To learn more about the Center for Accounting Transformation's research, visit improvetheworld.net. To learn more about how the NJCPA is addressing the accounting profession's talent crisis, visit njcpa.org/CPA pipeline.